All right. So,
Hmm.
in a world where the only thing more unpredictable than the weather, seemingly, is the economy, it certainly pays to have friends like my guest today in your corner. Despite his lengthy, unique, and diverse portfolio and resume, he actually says that spending 10 plus years in the restaurant industry was some of the best investment that he ever made and gave him more practical and applicable experience to his current endeavor and current position as a financial manager, financial advisor, and a portfolio manager. Um, One of my major goals here at Beyond the Bar is to try and improve the financial health and wealth of all the people that work in the restaurant industry. So having my guest today in my corner just seemed like an absolute godsend to talk about some of the issues that we know so little about. So without further ado, allow me to introduce to you Mr. Money Marvin. What's
Uh,
happening, brother?
Not a whole lot. Just having another calm day in the markets. We were down 1,800 points today, so days like this are where I get to earn my living, and it's more fun than a person my age should ever be allowed to have. I'm convinced that for sure.
Yeah.
But it's all in the day's work. I've been doing this for a very long time, and I find it to be almost as much fun as being in the bar and restaurant business. You mentioned that in your intro.
Mm.
Um, I was in the bar and restaurant business for 10 years, back in the 70s and early 80s, in the DC area. And again, it was more fun than you can possibly ever have. And I'm really happy to have an opportunity to talk to your people today, because that's, I think, the single best business you can get in, as to act not only to stay in if you wish, but to act as a stepping stone to take you into nearly any other field you want to go in. I'm a classic example. I don't have a degree in finance. All my educational background was in biology, chemistry, physics, and all that stuff. But I ended up in the restaurant business to make a living, because teaching is a hard way to make a living. That's what I was doing before. And so all of a sudden, after 10 years of doing that and getting old and tired, I thought, there's got to be a better way. So after 4 or 5 years of starting a business of my own that was completely unrelated, I thought that maybe getting into the investment business would be a great idea. And it's turned out to be great. And that was 34 years ago this summer. So it's the one thing that stuck with me. So the reason I go back to the restaurant and bar business is because the skills that you learn there, or the skills that you have to have innately in order to be successful in that business, are ones that are almost impossible to get anywhere else in one space. For instance, if you're in the bar business, especially tending bar or acting as a cocktail server, either way, you find that you really become a great psychiatrist, psychologist kind of person. Everybody knows the story of the bartender being the amateur psychiatrist. And by the way, they do a lot better than the pros, I can tell you that. And you learn a great deal about people. You learn a great deal about money. You learn about alcohol and how it affects people's behavior, obviously, and you learn how to deal with those things. So you get a complete medical psychiatric kind of training to go along with it. And then if you get into the management or ownership side of the bar, you learn a tremendous amount up close and personal about finance, and about how businesses operate, and about how thin the profit margins are. I mean, all of us are familiar with how people will talk about, gosh, you pay $25 for a handle of vodka, and then you get $7.50 or $8.50 for a drink, and the markup must be huge, and everybody must be coining money. What they don't stop to think about is how little of that money that comes in for the price of the drink actually filters down into the owner's pocket. It's a very thin margin business.
Hmm.
And ultimately, the people who do make a lot of money in it as owners or managers are ones that have a lot of places and make a little bit off of each one. It's rare that you ever find that there's one business that's so profitable that it ends up making the owner or manager rich. So in any event, the moral of the story here is that you can learn about people, you can learn about finance, you know about math. I guarantee you everybody who's a server knows how to calculate percentages, because
Right.
you know what percent that guy left the tip for. You know it to the tenth of a percent in
Yeah.
your head. So, everybody talks about, I can't do math without a calculator. I beg to differ. Go talk to your average bartender or server, and they'll do math for you faster than anybody on the street. So it's a great springboard. And if you can successfully navigate that business while keeping your liver and your head intact, you can go out and do just about anything else you want. It may not be the best credentials in the sense of a degree in finance or an MBA or anything like that, but I guarantee you, if push comes to shove, the experience you can get in that business will serve you better than virtually any other business I can think of as a stepping stone to do something else or something on your own. So I'm a big fan. And again, besides the fact that it's the most fun you can have, and you get to meet an amazing array of people, it's very, very good business training. So don't ever short sell that. I think it's a very strong thing.
Yeah, wow, that's incredible, and that sums up about 5 questions that I would have had for you in
So,
in that
didn't
intro.
mean to front run you there.
No, perfect.
Yeah,
Honestly, it
yeah,
saves us time there. So that's
yeah.
one of the things that I kind of wanted to start this channel was for like people that are kind of, you know, how a lot of people outside of the industry deem that as the Neverland, kind of not a real job and not some of this, but you just touched on a lot of the things that I personally agree with, and that's
Hmm.
you develop the skill sets as long as it just weighs on your perspective. And what you're saying in the time being is that, yeah, you may not think you're, you know, a finance manager, but if I ask you, did you give you 20% on that? Or like, no, it was like 18, but
Yeah,
what's 18% of, 1200 anyway. So,
yeah, exactly.
yeah, I love that you actually touched right on that. So, as we start to dive into more of the topics of, people who are starting out, um, I may be speaking on a limb here, but I am speaking from my personal experience, having 10 plus years in the industry. I feel like after 10 years, I still had like the same knowledge of finances, um, and honestly, just any sort of economical background that I had when I went into it. So, my topic and my purpose of this today was kind of to provide and answer some of the questions that people who are just starting out, or maybe who have these kind of questions that are just getting into investments, into really managing their financial health, their financial wealth,
Hmm.
starting to look at the future. Obviously, COVID, the quarantine, things like that really pulled the blanket out from everyone in the industry and was like,
It sure
okay,
did.
how secure are you really?
Yep.
And I think it put a lot of things in check with people, and there's still some people that are struggling with, I mean, not even speaking about the small business owners and
Hmm.
the servers and stuff, but the people who couldn't get financial aid or assistance like that. They
Right.
were kind of left out in the wind. So, um, as we get into that today, as the name of the game goes, this is Brews with Bosses. You are the boss. What are we sipping on here today, Marvin?
Well, this would be a Tito's and club soda with a wedge of lime. At home, I use the lime flavored soda if I could get it. And in the bars, I typically don't find it, but I recommend to all bar owners that they stock the lime flavored seltzer too. That's just for me, and I'll come by and have one. So cheers. Brews with Bosses is a great way. Chink, chink. Here we go. I see you have lime on
Tick.
yours too. That's a
Yeah,
good thing.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like we coordinated drinks.
Mm. Well, there you have it. So yeah, with that, this reminds me of Scott Adams. I don't know if you know who he is. He's a cartoonist
Mm,
who has written the Dilbert comic strip for many, many years. Yeah, what most people don't know is that he is also a trained hypnotist, and he's quite a political commentator and
mm,
quite an observer of human behavior in his own right. And he's a brilliant guy,
yeah,
rich as hell, and doing very well for himself. And he does podcasts every day that are it's Coffee with Scott Adams, and he always starts off with having everyone grab their coffee and says,
yeah,
a mug, a chalice, a cup or whatever, and you take the simultaneous sip. So he has all of his listeners on his Periscope cast that will, all take a big drink of coffee at the same time or whatever they happen to have in their mug at the time. I
yeah.
don't watch him every day, but every now and then I do, and it's really a good thing.
Well, I feel
But
like at the end of your day, the last thing I need to give you is more coffee to be more aware after, you're
That's
walking
yeah, yeah,
on
yeah. That's one of
eggshells.
the things. My dad was quite a drinker in his day, and he always used to say the last thing you want to do is give somebody that's drunk coffee, because the only thing you don't need is another wide awake drunk. So I kind of I get the idea, but this is an easy in for my day, and it's a real opportunity to get a chance to talk with you and to hopefully get some information out to the people that you work with and that are in the
Mhm.
business that might help them. You hit on something really interesting there a few minutes ago. You talked about how this COVID-19 thing pulled a blanket out from under everybody. And
Mhm.
that gets me to one of the things. And most of the clients that I have are fairly well-to-do people that learned these lessons early on. But from having been in the bar business, I know that most people in the business aren't necessarily all that responsible with their finances. And it's not because they're stupid or that they're bad people. It's
Mhm.
because they haven't really been given the knowledge or training to know what to do. And so, and occasionally I'll end up with their their adult children or
Mhm.
their cousins or whatever that need some help in just getting their feet on the ground to try to figure out what's some smart stuff to do with your money.
Yeah.
The nice thing about the bar business is that if you're in the right places and have the right shifts, you can make a great deal of money. The other problem is that everybody likes to party, and you go spend a great deal of money, and at the end of the process, you're back to zero again.
Right.
That's one of its attractions as well as one of its downfalls. But there are some general principles that I always try to talk to people about.
Mhm.
One of them is that you really, really need to try to work hard to get saved about 3 to 6 months worth of your living expenses and put it in the bank. Don't worry about the fact you're not making any interest on it. Just make sure you can get to it and have that stashed as a backstop. And I've said that for years to people. And only recently, because of COVID-19, has it become ever more apparent to a lot of people just why that's a good idea. On January 31st, everybody thought we were having a good year. The winter wasn't too bad. The weather wasn't too bad. We were skating along. And a month later, we were in the soup with this virus.
Right.
And everybody in the restaurant and bar business basically lost their income instantly. It happened overnight. Now, none of us think that that's going to happen. And it only occasionally happens to individuals. This time it happened to the whole crew everywhere. It's a disaster. And for the people who had the foresight to
Mhm.
put away that 3 to 6 months worth of savings, they've gotten through just fine. Here we are 3, 4 months into this whole process, maybe a little longer. The
Yeah.
ones that didn't started going hungry pretty quickly, and they started running into problems paying their rent. They run into problems buying groceries. I don't have to tell you, it's a tough world out there if you don't have some cash stashed away. So my first piece of advice from a financial standpoint to anybody, no matter what business you're in, but particularly if you're in an industry like that can go away instantly,
Yeah.
you want to make sure to try to write down a budget as to how much money you need to spend every month, and not just the bills that you have to pay, like your rent, your car payment, your utilities, and that stuff, but figure out a realistic amount of money that you need to spend on food, that you need to spend on a little bit of entertainment at least. You can't live your life like a hermit. And then figure out what that number is and add a little bit to it for the unexpected, and then multiply it by either 3 or 6, depending on how aggressive you are about this. And that's the number before you think about investing a dime, you need to put that number away in the bank and make sure it's safe, secure, and that you can get to it if COVID-20 comes along or COVID-21 next year. You get the idea. There's
Right.
always stuff that happens. I remember in the business, when I was in years ago, a frequent cause of personal financial disaster was if someone would, go skiing and break a leg.
Mhm.
What are you going to do if you're a waiter or a waitress or a bartender, and all of a sudden you've got a cast on your leg? You're out of work. And not only the medical expenses, which you may not have covered because of lack of health insurance, but you also end up, not having any income, and that can get to be a very scary situation. So,
Yeah.
as I said, number one thing I recommend is get some cash in the bank. Pretend once you get it, pretend like you don't have it, and just walk away from it. And don't think, oh, I'm going to dip into that for my trip to to the Rockies next spring or whatever, you want to definitely have that stashed away as your backstop because it's your safety blanket. And I'm a big fan of that. And don't even think about investing in stocks or bonds or anything crazy like that until you get that padding stashed away. So
Really?
that's lesson number one, and I would really recommend that to everybody as a first step. And you'd be amazed at how few people do that. It's funny. Just recently, I heard a statistic that 40 or 45% of U.S. adults don't even have the ability to meet a $400 emergency car repair in terms of cash on hand. $400. Now, I remember living like that a long time ago, but it wasn't very comfortable.
Hmm.
And now, I mean, $400 isn't that much money these days. And to think that people would be completely upset by a $400 car repair bill really is a sad statement about what people's spending habits and saving habits are like. So
Well,
that's just one of those things that, if you're in that position, don't feel like you're the only one, but don't let that be the excuse to keep being one of those. Go out there
that's
and save some money.
yeah. See, that's super interesting that you said that because one of the things that I try and coach is like self-awareness on your relationship with money. Because I'm sure you've realized over the
Hmm.
years that, like you addressed, um, we in the industry don't have the best relationship with money because it's kind of
Right.
easy come, easy go. And then
Yes.
even when it's in a paycheck form, a lot of times it can breed sort of a complacent nature if you're not growing. So one of the things that you just touched on there was having that $400 bill, right? Now that I think can come down to how people, because everyone might, regardless if you are a millionaire or you're just skating by, $400 might be $400, but it's kind of on your perspective, right? Like there's some people that I know that it's just on like what they prioritize their money on, where they say like, oh man, this vet bill is, $300 for my dog. Well, you pay it, right? You just pay it.
Sure.
But when
Yep.
something comes up like that, I find a lot of people are kind of like, oh, but people in our industry with the drop of a hat will go out on a Sunday and spend $400, you
Oh
know,
yeah.
and like it's nothing. But when that one thing comes up, so it's just an interesting thing that I've realized in kind of curating this relationship with money. And obviously, you're more on the financial side of things now, where it's like, all right, buddy, we got your money. Now we got to figure out what to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so, what do you think one of the things that people can do to like better that financial awareness? You talked about building a budget, getting realistic with it, finding 3 to 6 months. But when you're just coming out of COVID, when you're kind of relying on government, subsidies and things like that,
Hmm.
how do you start to get out of that mindset of scarcity versus growth? Like how can I still want to advance myself to make money but also know that like, all right, I need this little nest egg. Is it like all the money I get I put into that budget, or is it kind of like, I take this percentage each week? What do you think the easiest way for people to start getting comfortable is, um, to just building that relationship up with money again?
Sure. Well, one of the things that I recommend to people is that, and it goes back to something I mentioned a minute ago, is that you should write a budget out, and you
Mm,
literally write it out on a piece of paper and try to stick to it as much as you can. And there's an item I mentioned rent and car payments and utilities and all groceries and all of that.
yeah.
One of the things you should do is have another line item on there that says me, and you should pay yourself. Make sure that you're one of the priorities. You have to pay your rent because
Hmm.
if you don't, you won't have a place to live. And you have to pay your car payment because if you don't, you won't have a car to drive. And the list goes on. But
Hmm.
put me on there, me being the person involved, and you make sure to pay yourself every month and make sure you're as religious about that bill payment as you are about the payment to your landlord or your mortgage holder.
Yeah.
So put that in as a line item and stick with it. And don't go thinking of that as optional because you're not going to call yourself up and yell if you don't pay yourself, but you should. You need to
Hmm.
think of it that way as a discipline matter. One thing about we're talking about people in the bar and restaurant business here, but the reason they come to see you is because they're serious and want to be disciplined about their fitness.
Hmm.
Well, this is just another layer of fitness. Financial fitness is every bit as important as physical fitness. And the way you get physically fit is to be disciplined about your exercise, diet, nutrition, and so forth.
Hmm.
Well, apply that same level of discipline. I suspect that the people who will see this are ones that inherently have more discipline than just the average person out there. Otherwise, they wouldn't be your client. They wouldn't be looking at your channel on YouTube. They wouldn't be coming to you for advice. They either have discipline or they're looking for you to impart discipline to them.
Right.
So, as part of your training of your clients, you can make sure that they have discipline around their financial circumstances. And as I said, a written budget that they
Hmm.
go by pretty carefully, as well as making sure one line item on that budget is me. I got to pay myself before I go paying all the optional stuff. You know, the things that you can get by without. So that's
Gotcha.
writing things down is probably one of the smartest ways to go about it because it gives you a roadmap that you can go back and refer to. It's like a written, like a lesson plan or a behavioral plan or a workout schedule or something like that. You want to write it down and the first of the month or whenever it is that you know do your financial stuff, you
Hmm.
need to sit down and make sure that that line item is taken care of every bit as conscientiously as you would take care of your rent and car payment, things like that. So that's step number one. I think that's a real key element. You know, you make a written plan and go by it.
Are you an advocate for goal setting on these kind of things too? Like to get people from someone that's been in the industry, you know what it's like. Again, obviously, once I have my budget, now it's like, okay, now what? Right? What's
Yeah,
step
yeah,
two?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I am an advocate of goal setting for a lot of people. I think the person involved has to make that decision for themselves. Some people are goal oriented and some are process oriented. So now, a good example here, talking about putting 3 to 6 months living expenses aside, that can be a goal. You know, and if you write it down and you know what number you need to reach,
Mhm.
then you can establish that as a goal and you can work toward it if you're a goal directed person. And a great many people are, especially athletically inclined people. That
Mhm.
makes perfect sense. Other people are process oriented. They just want to know what the process is. And once they get the rhythm of the process, they'll just go through it and just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And
Mhm.
that'll get you there too. But it's nice to have a little of both, I think.
Yeah.
And it all goes back to personal discipline. We being people from the bar background, and I certainly speak, you know, as that way.
Yeah.
We tend to maybe lack a little discipline in some areas of our lives. You know, we might tend to party a little hard. We might tend to, you know, take a few chances that other people might not. Live a little closer to the edge, skate a little closer to the edge of the ice. You know, that
Mhm.
we all do that or did that in my case. But honestly, whether you're goal oriented or process oriented, it's a matter of doing it. You've got to actually do it instead of just think about it or talk about it. You got to, you know, actually make that step. It's just like making yourself go to the gym. You know,
Yeah.
if you know if you have a routine and you violate that routine, then you'll violate your financial routine too. You know,
Hmm.
it's all nearly everything that anybody accomplishes comes from inside of them. You know, and everyone's wired differently. You just can't put one plan in place that's going to work for everyone, just as you can't put an exercise plan in place that works for everyone. You've got to custom tailor it. But ultimately it comes from inside them. They need to figure out what buttons inside they need to push of their own to get them to do the things that they need to do.
Mhm.
Some people just are, and you talk about relationship with money. It's funny you mention it that way because um, everybody's different, but there are two or three big categories of people. There are some that I've seen that the only thing they want to do is save, and it just breaks their heart to ever spend a dime. You know,
Right.
that's one. They are just all they want to do is save and accumulate,
So
and
that
that's
right there, Marvin, that's
mhm,
kind of the where I wanted to go with that relationship, because there are people that just like to see that number in their bank account, and to them that is wealth, that is security,
sure,
that's everything, you know.
right.
But what they so go ahead, but that's beautiful, yeah.
Yeah. So, but then there are just as many, if not more, that are like, as soon as they get, more than they're going to spend that night, they can't wait to go out and try to find something else to buy, even if it's
Mhm.
something they don't need, or they can't, they'll just go, blow it away somewhere. There's all sorts of different categories of people, but people's relationships with money often, if you think about it, there are other relationships in their lives that they handle differently too. Whether it's with in the romantic world, in their business life, in their willingness to go outside, to color outside the lines, to go outside the box, to go push their comfort level, to go to go do something different.
Mhm.
Um, Everybody has a different style, and ultimately, I think, and I may be wrong about this, but I believe people are born with that. I think that you have that. It's like I think I used to think that people were born as pretty much a blank slate, and that their experiences in life would form who they are.
Right.
Years ago, I used to think that was like 99% of how the way the world worked. And I had a few experiences with friends of mine and their children where I completely changed my mind 180 degrees on that. And I believe that you are born pretty much being what you're going to be,
Mm.
and your path in life, it may change it. You may go from the left lane to the right lane, but you're not going to get on a different road. You're going to end up, you're genetically programmed to live a certain life, to have a, I don't mean the details of it, but I mean the way you are you outgoing, or are you shy? Are
Right.
you aggressive, or are you timid? Or are you inquisitive, or are you just happy to be sitting there like a lump on a log? There's a lot of different dichotomies that you can paint, that people have different characteristics. And I, over the years, have really come to believe that you're kind of born to be the person you are, and your environment just sort of fine tunes it a little bit. And it may dress it up a little bit or dress it down a little bit, but it won't fundamentally change it.
Hmm.
That's just my opinion, and I can't give you evidence to that, but I've seen a lot of that in my own life, and I truly believe that that's how we are.
And to come full circle on that, so the person that, because the next topic I kind of want to segue to would be like risk management when we're actually getting into it. That same person, right, when we talk about saving versus spending, they see that number in their bank account,
Hmm.
and it's weird. It's kind of like what they value themselves at,
Hmm.
So what is rich to some people is when I have $20,000 in my bank account, but
Hmm.
I'm still stressed out because I have debt, and I still have these
Yes.
things. So when you say that about, um, like talking about risk and taking these sort of things, I feel like that's what I've seen so far on my end would be that delayed gratification. That's the
Hmm.
one thing when you were trying to touch on how someone would come to a personal trainer as they would come
Hmm.
to a financial advisor. It's the ability to delay gratification and seek that professional counsel that can kind of be like, all right, this is where I am, but I
Yep.
also need your help to be accountable towards that, and
Right.
because I know who I am. So therefore I'm seeking your help because, in all your infinite wisdom, you're going to help manage this because I know that if I'm in charge of it, I'm going to, you know,
Yep.
so I think that that's kind of where I found that correlation. And I can agree with you on that because it's, whether it's nature, nurture, your environment, your experiences, I think people can be taught, people can, you can learn ways to better yourself, but there is that inherent instinct that you have to overcome if you're going to level up, change who you are, and to level up your financial fitness as well. So,
Yep.
um, as we kind of segue there, I wanted to, like, we got step one for the budget. Step two is kind of assessing that relationship that you have. So once you already have your money in place, you're like, this is what it is. I'm safe here. Um, am I safe? Right. Uh,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
step three being, now what? Do I start clearing debt before I go into the stock market, or what would you suggest from there?
Well, you're on one of my favorite topics right there. You just said the ugliest four-letter word in the English language, as far as I'm concerned, just a second ago. You said the word debt, D-E-B-T. That is the ugliest word in the English language. I am a proponent of no debt if possible. Now, I realize that that's unrealistic for most people to have zero debt
Mhm.
forever, unless you're born rich or whatever. But the truth of the matter is that debt is like a cancer that eats away at you from the inside. If you have a choice, you should always be on the receiving end of interest, not on the paying end of interest. It would seem obvious, and people have really kind of gotten away from thinking so much like that now, because for the last 10 or 15 years, interest rates have been so low that
Right.
you can't really earn any interest on money. Like, you put your money in the bank and they're going to pay you like 0.03% interest, and if you're lucky,
Yeah.
and that's just terrible. However, it's still better to be collecting it than to paying. So I recommend to people, in addition, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because my other thing besides, saving the 3 to 6 months of expenses as a safety net is that you want to pay down debt, and particularly high interest rate debt like credit card debt.
Mhm.
That's the worst possible debt of all. There's two kinds of debt, really, when you think about it. There's debt that will, if when you've paid it off, you have something at the end that was worth the extra cost of interest that you paid. That would be a house. That would be a car. That's a good car that you're going to keep for a while, not one that you're going to trade in every 6 months. But there, and it can also be student debt for getting an education, provided the education is one that will allow you to earn a better living. It really concerns me that the biggest pool of debt that exists in America today is student loan debt.
Mhm.
It used to be mortgage debt, and that's actually been superseded by student loan debt now as
Really?
the largest single outstanding pile of debt of all the categories of debt out there. It's even bigger than home mortgage debt. That's a crime, especially considering that the educations that people get now for taking on that debt often don't provide them the means to go and retire that debt by earning a substantially better living.
Mhm.
It's actually gotten to the point that, and this isn't a value judgment, but it's just a purely numerical or financial judgment, that you almost can make the case that it's not worth getting a degree now if you have to go into debt to do it, unless you're going to get a degree in something where there's a definite job pathway for you. For
Mhm.
instance, you've heard of what they call STEM: science, technology, engineering, and math. If
Mhm.
you get a degree in those fields or ones related to it, you'll almost certainly be able to get a good enough job that you can pay down that debt, in a reasonable period of time. But if you are going to get one in, like, Southeast Asian women's studies, or art history, or, I mean, I'm probably going to offend a lot of people here, but all of the
It's
anything
okay.
that has the word studies in it, I
Yeah.
guarantee you that you're going to pay more for it than it's going to pay you back in return. That's, unfortunately, there's not a high demand for that stuff. And I believe that in the future, in the not too distant future, you're going to see accountability being brought to bear on universities for permitting students to take on debt to study fields of study that don't permit them to earn a good living with that afterwards.
Really?
Because to me, it's malpractice on the university's side to actually permit a student to take on $100,000 or 200,000 in some cases in debt to get a degree in something that there's no market for, none whatsoever. And that I just find that to be
You think
criminal.
that that would be like kind of hell to pay down the road?
Oh my God, absolutely. And I think, first of all, COVID has done so many different things it'll take us forever to learn all the things that it actually did. I mean, the echoes of this will be occurring over the next, decade, your whole life. You will mark your life, as a person your age. You will mark your life as pre-virus and post-virus from now on. This was the
Yes.
seminal
Scary.
event of your generation up to now. Whereas for my generation, it could have been the assassination of JFK. It
Mhm.
could have been 9/11. It could have been the global financial crisis 12 years ago, when real estate went belly up. I mean, there's, pick your poison. For my parents' generation, it was Pearl Harbor.
Mhm.
I mean, back in the 1941. So the point is that everything changed. There's sometimes in human history where things occur that everything that from that point forward is drastically different than it was up to that point. So it's like a line of demarcation. COVID-19 is one of those. And the reason I'm bringing that up to the conversation right here is because I believe that in 5 years from now, 30 to 50% of public universities and colleges will be closed.
Hmm.
30 to 50%. Now, I may be way off on that, but I'm getting this data from some pretty smart people.
Yeah.
And the reason is because people have wised up, first of all, to the idea that you don't have to go there to get the same education because you can get it through your, you can get it online. That's what they've just been doing for the last 90 days, and it works just fine. It
Right.
doesn't work any worse because believe me, people coming out of school today, in many cases don't have any more education than the people who just came out of, 90 days in their parents' basement watching TV. So, it's not like there's a big quality leap there.
Huh.
So I think that you're going to see public education, not public education, but university education availability really shrink down to what's really valuable instead of just a place to go warehouse kids for the 4 years from 18 to 22 to keep them out of their mom's hair. That's what
Wow.
really universities have become in so many ways now. So that's going to change, and the debt associated with that is going to change, and the ability to get that to acquire those loans, which has been way too easy up to now, is probably going to get much harder in the future because there's going to be performance requirements on the part of the university. They're now they're going to have to say, well, if you're going to take out, if you're going to have to take out $100,000 to get this degree, then it may be that you will have to we'll have to assure that you can get a job that's sufficient to pay that money back over a reasonable amount of time. And if not, then the university may have to start helping you pay your student loan debt because they didn't deliver what they said they would. It's kind of like
That's
a warranty.
yeah.
Kind of like a warranty.
That's really interesting.
Isn't that weird? But
Yeah.
that's the world that's in the post-virus world. That's one of the things that's going to pop out of this, and no one's even been talking about that much yet because we're still in the social distancing and mask stage of what will be a years-long process of seeing how many things are different because of this particular event. So the world changed with COVID in ways that we haven't even remotely explored yet and don't even know. We're making these things up as we go along, literally.
Yeah.
There's no playbook for this. But it's interesting to be part of and to watch, if not necessarily all that pleasant. But we've all been part of a grand experiment that nature has performed on us here in the last 3 or 4 months, and this is just the top of the first inning. I mean, we've got a lot of innings to go. I don't know how it's going to turn out.
Yeah, I don't think anybody does, as we're finding out
No,
more and more now. And
exactly.
yeah, to that, right? So where we kind of go from there would be like, all right, here's COVID. It just ruined the lives of virtually
Yeah,
everybody, right? Everyone in the
sure.
world. It just nuked the world. So when you have people that are kind of like, they're in student debt, they start paying off some debt, they're getting to that point where it's like, where does that, if that falls in line with the budget, and I start to get myself out, right? We start paying down some debt. As you said, interest is really, the cancer that eats you from the inside out. So once I start to free myself out from that, what do you think would be, in your opinion, a good place to start for people? And I'm not talking like specific stocks or
Hmm.
things like that, but
Oh,
what
sure.
would be a good move for people that are like, listen, I got money. The restaurants are making money again, right? Because they will. It's inevitable. They're going to.
Hmm.
They're going to suffer for a little while, and that's the hard truth of it. But um, to someone that's looking to get started in their investment, portfolio, we'll say,
Hmm.
where do we
Hmm.
go once we start paying down that high interest debt?
Well, that's a good question. And what I first of all recommend, I have my motto is always be reading. I think that the people need to be constantly reading if you're not involved doing something else. And you should read a broad array of everything. First of all, you need to be up on the current news ugly as it sounds, you need to know what's going on in the world around you. It's your responsibility as a citizen to be informed about what's going on. If not, you're just floating like driftwood on the ocean. So you need to get educated about what's going on in your world.
The benefit of
And
that being what? That you're just staying on top of things,
you
or
you
you
need to
saying
stay
like
on you need to
self-educate?
know, you need to be aware of trends, and you also, as a responsible citizen, you need to be aware of how your impact as a citizen is best put forward. In other words, how do you vote? What do you believe? What are the things that benefit you? And who are the people running for public office on the local level, the national level, the state level? What who are those? Which of those are going to represent you best? And
Mm,
we all have our political opinions, and we won't need to go into any of those for the purpose of this discussion,
for
but you
sure.
need to have them, and they need to be informed opinions, not just what your buddy says is right or what your mom and dad always says. We always vote for party A instead of party B, and this is what you should do too. That's not good enough. You need to understand the reasons and the rationale. And the way you get that understanding is to read. You
Mhm.
need, whether you read online or read on paper, it doesn't matter, but you need to read. And you need to read widely, not just about current events and politics, but you need to be, if you want to be a successful person in the world, you need to be what's called conversationally competent. That's
Mm,
a big difference than being an expert. You just need to be conversationally competent about as many things as possible, even if they don't interest you. If you think they have an impact on your world and your life, you need to learn about them. And the way you get that is by constantly being reading. I've often said, I used to tell our kids, I said, if you're sitting at the breakfast table, you ought to be reading the back of the cereal box to see what the ingredients are, not because you care, but because you need to learn everything that you can possibly learn,
mm,
because every now and then something will happen where that piece of knowledge will pop out and be useful to you. And it may be useful in a way that will open up a world of things to you that you wouldn't have thought otherwise. As an example, let's suppose you're going to you want to get a better job or get into an industry or a business, and you happen to have an encounter with someone who's in that business that might be a gateway for you.
mm.
If you can talk intelligently, even on the surface, about some parts of that,
Right.
you're going to make an impression on that person and elevate your chances of being able to get hired or get in the door or get the interview or whatever it takes, that you wouldn't have gotten had you just sat there like a lump on a log with your mouth shut.
Mm,
So get conversationally competent about as many different things as you can. Most people already are enormously competent about the things they're interested in. I mean, think about it. If you're, I don't care, if you're a mechanic or a landscaper or a bartender or a waitress or, a physical fitness coach or whatever it happens to be, you're passionate about those things, and you know about them, and you're able to talk about them intelligently with people. But learn some other things too, maybe
mm,
things that don't strike your mind just now, but they will later. And you can start to become at least aware of other things, so that you pick up on what other people are interested in, because people really want to know what you're interested in. It means something to them. they don't
mhm.
they don't really care what's interesting to you. So you need to put yourself in a position where you're competent about a lot of different things. But back to your question about what to do about investing, when you get to that point where you've got your 3 to 6 months put away, and all of a sudden and you've also paid down your debt as much as possible, or you're on a good pathway to pay it down,
Mhm.
that's when you can start doing some investing. And that's a whole it's an enormous topic, but the bottom line is, it comes down to this: there are there's only four things you can do in the investment world with a dollar, and I'll tell you what they are. The first one is, you can invest it for liquidity. And that means, I don't care what I earn on it, but I don't want it to go away, and I want it to be handy whenever I need it. That's
Mhm.
the 3 to 6 months part. That's investment objective one. There's no upside to it, but there's no downside either. The upside is security.
Gotcha.
Investment objective number two is to invest for current income. That means I want to buy things that pay me cash every quarter, every month, whatever. And a good example of that would be rental property for
Mm-hmm.
somebody who wants to be in the real estate world, or it could be stocks that pay dividends, or not so much now, but the principle is good. With bonds, bonds pay interest every 6 months, like treasury bonds or corporate bonds or whatever. But interest rates are so low, they're not really such a great deal right now. But those are current income is investment objective number 2. It's things that
Right.
pay cash to you. Investment objective number 3 is the one that you and most everybody else is interested in, and that's capital growth.
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to put your money in things that grow. Now, unfortunately, when you invest in things that are able to grow, you have to take some risk. And the
Mm-hmm.
risk is that they shrink instead of grow. So we're talking stocks, and again, we're talking real estate, things that can fluctuate in price. Now, the word fluctuation means both directions. It can go up or down, but you have to be able to have it fluctuate in order to have a chance at all that it's going to fluctuate in the upward direction. So there's risk involved.
Mm-hmm.
That's growth as an objective. And then the final one, and this is the part that I saved for last because it's the one that's the most fun and the most dangerous, and that's speculation. That's a perfectly legitimate thing to do with money if you have the stomach for it, the money for it, and the knowledge to do it. But think of it as gambling.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing wrong with going to Atlantic City and taking your chance at the tables. You're not likely to win, but you might. That's speculation. That's gambling. Same way with buying penny stocks, the little crazy companies that nobody ever heard of. That if you're right, you can make 100 times your money in 60 days, and if you're wrong, it's going to go away. And B is usually the choice there. But
Yeah.
that speculation is fun. There's a lot of speculative stuff out there, and unfortunately, because it always comes with a sexy story, it sucks people in who really want to be investing for growth,
Mm-hmm.
but they get sucked into speculating. And as with most gambling, you do it long enough and you'll probably lose.
Yeah.
So those are the 4 things. And I defy anybody to come up with any other than combinations of those 4. Those are the only 4 things you can do in the entire world of investing. You can invest it for liquidity, for current income, for growth, or for speculation. And you got to make sure you know which one of those you're doing and which one of those what you're comfortable with. And you can have some of each. I mean, you don't have to have all your money in one of those things. You can have, but you really do need to have that 3 to 6 months thing stashed in number 1 in the liquidity piece.
Right.
And only then do you free yourself to be able to go and do the others.
So they kind of build off of each other, right? 1 being
They do.
liquidity, and then 2 being current income. Because then if you
Right.
have rental properties or small dividend stocks, but I think this is kind of tying together because where you mentioned in the beginning about having that relationship with money, and then also being able to have the awareness to the money and what you want it to do with you, right? So how it goes. And that's kind of like the good and evil of it, right? So if you get into this game, and I've found it, and I know nothing in this world, truthfully, comparatively, but for where, how quickly it can go from capital growth to speculation, where you're like, all right, I'm in it. And then you start reading, what are they? What are some of the popular ones? Like Barron's,
yeah.
Those sort of things where they get you like, oh, I just found the next best thing,
Right.
and then you buy into it, and all of a sudden everyone's an expert. And you see this in any field, but it's kind of funny when you're getting into stocks and investments. I found it was like this revelation moment. I was like, this is great. This is just like adult gambling, no one bats an eye at it.
Yeah.
And that's where I found really quickly that I was like, oh, all right, yeah, this takes a lot more time, and you're not that good at it. You should probably, learn from something else.
It's funny you should mention that because, and this goes back to the COVID thing. The weirdest thing has happened in the last 4 months. It fascinates me. Barstool Sports, Dave Portnoy, everybody knows about that. Okay. So because of no sporting events going on because of COVID, he ditched the sports thing, and now he's called Davey Day Trader. And so now he has a website where he talks about his trading activities in the stock market all the time. And you, depending on how much you follow the news, the stock market bottomed out back in March at the worst of the COVID situation when it was first getting underway. It took a huge dive, like 35% or so in just a few weeks. And since then, until this week, it has gone up like a rocket ship.
Hmm.
And that's when Dave Portnoy has got involved in all this stuff. And he has all these people. There's a trading platform called Robinhood. It's an online trading account thing where you can basically open an account, put some money in there, and you can buy and sell stocks and options and whatever at no commission. So it's really it's like, you know,
So you advise
yeah,
that for people that are just getting
I
started out?
don't advise that at
Do
all.
not. Okay.
But what
Continue.
I'm trying to tell you is all the people who were sports betting junkies and who
Mhm.
were locked in their houses with COVID, because of COVID for the last 3 or 4 months, have now turned into day traders in the stock market. And it was a large part of their money that drove the market way, way back up until literally this week. And now today we're starting to see where it's starting to roll over again. And here's the problem. These people have experience buying and seeing things go up. They have zero experience in seeing things go down. And it twists your mind pretty badly when that goes on if you don't have a plan. And I guarantee you, they don't have a plan. And a lot of people are going to get carried out on a board from this. It's going to be ugly. But you can the idea of what you said about um, uh, people, about it takes a lot of time and a lot of knowledge and so forth. It does. And it's, if you think it's, see Dave Portnoy, he's online all day, and he says, I'm the new Warren Buffett. This is easy. I got, that guy's got nothing on me. Well, I got news for you. He's 90 years old and he's a multi-billionaire, one of the richest 3 or 4 people in the world. And believe me, he does have something on you, Jay. He really does. But in the meantime, you can score a few wins and think you're the hot dog on the street. And that's where that guy is right now. And I don't
Mhm.
wish him ill. I think he's a fun guy to watch and all that, but he won't come out of this well. This is there's an old saying that the stock market exists for one reason and one reason only, and that's to make the biggest fool out of the largest number of people,
Hmm.
because it's way smarter than you are. And just when you think you have it all figured out, it's going to pull the rug out from under you. It never fails. And you can always tell when that's about to happen, because the people who are speculating are squawking the loudest about how smart they are. And
Interesting.
it's God's way of getting you for that. When everybody's in and everybody's making money and everybody's happy as a clam, that's a good day to sell, because everybody is about to have their rear ends handed to them on a plate.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what I mean. Like I think it started happening today. So in any
Now,
event,
what causes that? Like what? I mean,
well,
when it really comes down to, right? So when you got
it
people
all
that are
comes
like,
down to buying and selling. In other words, first of all, this is the thing in finance that most people don't understand. There is no inherent value in anything. I don't care whether it's house, car, what I'm talking about, financial value, not personal value.
mhm,
There's no inherent value at all. The only reason anything has a price tag on it is because the price that it will transact, that will sell at, is the price where the buyer and seller both agree to swap. The buyer's going to swap the money and the seller's going to swap the stock or the
mhm.
car or the house or the whatever or the beer. I mean, why does a beer go for $6.50 in a bar? It's because that's the price that everyone agree. The seller is willing to give the beer away, and the buyer is willing to pay the $6.50.
Mm.
It's not worth anything. I mean, it doesn't have any monetary value, but it's what the buyer and seller agree on. So when you get a bunch of buyers and sellers all mingling together, you have what's called a market. And the price of anything on any given moment is where the buyers and sellers tee up and balance out each other. You've got as much buying pressure as selling pressure, and that's the price. And what makes the price go down is if more people get concerned and want to get out and sell. What makes the price go up? If more people get greedy and want to buy. So ultimately, what changes the price and what determines the price of everything is fear and greed.
Right.
Fear of it going down is why people sell, and greed because it's going to go up is what people buy for. And so it's human behavior. And by the way, this has been true way before the internet and way
Right.
before
I was going to
the,
say
you know,
it's
I
a
mean,
story as old as time.
it's the oldest story in the book. And it's kind of like, you know, one of the things a lot of people have what I call anchoring is that they know that they paid $20 a share for a stock, whatever it happens to be, and it'll go down to 15 or whatever for whatever reason. And they'll think, well, I'm just going to wait till it gets back up to 20 and then I'll sell it and I'll break even. Well, what, that stock doesn't know what you paid for it and it doesn't care. All it knows is what it's worth today. And what it's worth today is what somebody's willing to pay you for it. So a lot of people say, well, if I don't sell, I don't really take a loss because it's just on paper. I got news for you. You have a loss. And yes, it's on paper, but whether you sell and realize that loss practically, or whether you just own it at a loss and don't sell it, it's
Mm-hmm.
still a loss. So there are a lot of behavioral psychology things that cause people to be bad investors, and anchoring is one of them. They anchor on the price they paid and think that there's some magic about that, and there's not at all. I remember a person I worked with years and years ago told me a story about in the early 70s, Avon Products, which, you know, the makeup company,
Mm-hmm.
still in business. At one point, it was trading for like $50 a share back in 1971, and in 25 years later, in 1996, it was still trading for the same price. And over that entire time, it had been down to almost zero. It had been up to 100, but it was still the same stock and it's still the same price. And it just didn't make anybody any money. And I don't even know what it's done since then, nor do I care because I don't own it. But it's you know, the value of something is only at any given moment what someone is willing to pay you for it. And houses really trap people like that. You probably are too young to remember, but the housing crisis in 2006, 7, and 8, a lot of people had paid big money for houses, like down here at the beach, for instance. People were paying scandalous amounts of money for houses that in the 2-year period from '06 to '08, they would go down 50, 60, 70% lower. And or if you wanted to sell them, literally, if you bought a $500,000 house on the beach back then, you might have to get out of it. You might have only been able to sell it for 250, 275. That's a big number to lose.
Yeah.
And it happened all the time. And people have this notion that real estate can't go down. I got news for you. It does. It can't. It's all a matter of what someone is willing to pay. So the markets, the study of market psychology is an amazing thing because it's so easy to understand and yet so hard to perform
Mm-hmm.
because it requires that we do things that are against our better nature.
So
First of
with
all, when
that, like, do
prices are
you,
going up, I'm sorry.
I was going to say with that, do you, you know, because you get to see this stuff on a firsthand approach every day. Do you see um, certain trends? So for people that are like kind of starting out, is it worth, um, you know, a lot of the base level information that you're going to get for education in the stock is like high, low risk, right? Whether it's
Hmm.
401k stocks and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
So for people that aren't familiar with those terms, because we've kind of just touched on them there, like high risk meaning blank, you know, low risk
Hmm.
meaning what, and what
Hmm.
kind of person would fall into that category? Like, where would you want to go from there?
Well, it's interesting you should ask because everyone has a different risk tolerance. You know,
Mm,
we talked about the savings, people's savings accounts and things earlier, and how some people all they want to do is just save. They don't want to spend money. They just want to save the money and see the bank balance get bigger.
mhm,
Others really, you know, that's not what drives them. And it's the same way with the risk thing. Some people aren't comfortable with any risk at all. And by the way, it's okay to not be comfortable with risk about your money. You don't have to do all these fancy things. And I actually recommend against it for most people, unless you do have the ability to withstand some drawdowns in your capital on a path to, you know, to a higher goal. Um, the stock market especially isn't a straight line thing. If you put money in today, there's a statistic that's true that on average you get about 10% per year growth in stocks.
mhm.
That's true. Is it 10% every year? No way. I mean, last year was a great year. It was up over 30%. But again, This year, we were at one point down 30%, and we were only in February. So, it just doesn't go in a straight line. I do think that if you buy a diversified basket of stocks, and you don't have to have much money to do that because of these things called mutual funds, where you can just, buy a participation in the fund, and inside the fund is a whole big a basket of different stocks. I do think that most people are better off not buying individual stocks, but buying mutual funds instead, and having the manager of the mutual fund do the stock picking for them. It's
Which you
not as
can't.
interesting or exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
So
it's
not as
probably a better
sexy.
way.
But do you have to go through like an investment manager and a portfolio manager, a financial advisor to do those sort of things to get a mutual
Actually,
fund?
no. You can. There's so much information online now, and I recommend. I don't know the Robinhood website. It's fairly new, and it's designed for aggressive young day traders. But the established companies like Charles Schwab and
Uh-huh.
T. Rowe Price and Fidelity. Fidelity's a really good one up in Boston. Huge. They're one of the biggest in the business, and you can open an account with them, and they will actually, you can dial the 800 number, and they will have an advisor there that can give you very sound advice about how to start out, how to how to think about risk. They can help you identify your own risk, because by asking you a series of questions, and your answers will sort of uncover what your risk tolerance really is.
Hmm.
um, there's a tremendous amount of stuff that's there now that wasn't available even 10 or 15 years ago. And the beauty is that because of zero commission trading, you don't have to pay for it. I mean, it's really just out. They want your assets in house, because they will make money off of that in a way that won't hurt you, but it does benefit them. And there's just so much out there now that's available, that you don't have to spend a lot of money to be able to get a good financial education. There's tremendous stuff. Vanguard is a firm right up near Philly,
Hmm.
huge mutual fund family that has very high quality stuff. Fidelity, that I mentioned, T. Rowe Price in Baltimore. These are gigantic companies that have very, very sound advisors that will work with you over the phone, and their pricing is very, is either zero or very reasonable. And you can get educated in a hurry like that, with by working with a firm like that, even with relatively small amounts of money.
All right.
So that's what I recommend. It goes back to the reading thing. You don't have to read it in a book. Read it online. Go to any of those with websites, and they'll have an investor education tab that you can click on, and you can read for the next week and learn more stuff than you could ever learn by sitting in a finance class in a community college or something like that.
Hmm.
So, and by the way, that's not a bad thing to do either. If you just go take a course in basic finance at community college for a relatively modest sum, and you'll learn a great deal. Usually, the professors of those are pretty sharp and actually can give you a tremendous amount of education. And
Really?
I
Okay.
recommend that too. So, and I'm kind of talking against my own position here. The people that I typically have as clients are ones that have two commas and 7 or 8, in some cases 9 figures to the left of the decimal point. I like those people a lot. they're
Right. Right.
they're they keep mama in shoes, and and so so but but for people starting out, people like me aren't where you need to go. You need to go where it's not going to cost you a bunch of money for the lessons that you'll need to learn.
Right.
And fortunately, those big providers like that, Vanguard, T. Rowe Price, Fidelity, and so forth, they've done a magnificent job of fostering investor education. And if you just click online, you can go on that and learn more than your mom and dad did when they were your age by a factor of 100,
Hmm.
because it just wasn't available as information back then. So
Wow.
it's a really cool thing. I recommend it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's a great start for, I think, people to kind of getting in. We talk about, um, you know, step one. I go back in my notes as I was taking them along
Hmm.
there. But as we kind of go through everything, creating your budget, creating that awareness, getting real on your relationship with it, and your awareness to it. Like what is wealth to you? What are your goals with the money? What do you want to do with it once you have that little nest egg and that liquidity that you
Hmm.
talked about? Clearing your debt, getting rid of the interest, and then once you kind of move from there, you could look more towards what is that? Your current income,
Hmm.
capital growth, which
Hmm.
is would would mutual funds fall in more of a line of capital growth?
Well, a mutual fund, each mutual fund has a different target of types of securities that they invest in.
Mm,
The ones that are in the stock mutual funds are the ones that give you the best capital growth. The bond mutual funds are typically more for retired people that want to take current income off their portfolio. I mean, think about it this way. Everybody has to have either a job or a portfolio that produces income. You got to have income. I mean, everybody needs some income, in order just to survive on a monthly basis. So if you don't have a job that's bringing in income, you need a portfolio that's generating income, or a rich
yeah,
uncle that's writing you checks. But you've got to have income from some source. But typically, younger people who are earning enough, earning an income in their employment, are really looking for the growth piece to come from their investment portfolio, not so
right.
much the income. That's more for retired people, or people who just don't want to work and have enough money stashed away that they can have that money making money for them and sending them a check every month or every quarter.
Hmm.
So yeah, but the stock mutual funds, that's where the fun is. And one thing, I recommend, and this is harder in the bar and restaurant business, obviously, because unless it's changed, I don't think that a tremendous number of bar and restaurants have 401k or any other kind of retirement offerings for people.
Yeah.
If they do, or if in any other job, you can get that benefit, by all means take advantage of it. Because first of all, the money you put into one of those does not get taxed currently. All of it goes in. So if let's say your tax rate is 20%, if for every $10 that you put into a 401k, the whole $10 goes in. It's not like the eighth that you get in your pocket after you pay your taxes. So
Mm-hmm.
that right off the bat is a good benefit. And by the way, that money grows tax free until you retire.
Hmm.
And second of all, a lot of employers will match dollar for dollar at least some portion of what you put into your 401k. So it's like, for instance, my employer will match the first 2% that I put in. So if I put in 2% of my pay into the 401, they'll put in a matching sum right alongside it, and it's mine. So
Yeah.
it's like, if you don't put your 2% in, you're walking away from free money. That doesn't make any sense. But the other side of it is, you've got to leave it in there until you're retired. So because if it's not taxed now, it will be taxed later. But there's a rule in finance that a tax deferred is a tax unpaid. And I'm a big fan of unpaid taxes. I don't like taxes at all. They're not my friend.
Yeah.
So in any event, always participate in those things when they're available to you. And the other thing they do is they force you to save and invest that way, through a process called dollar cost averaging. And what that means in English is that, let's say you're putting the same dollar amount in an investment strategy every month. Let's say $200. I'm just going to pick a number. If the market is down and you put $200 in, your $200 buys more shares because the price is low.
Mm-hmm.
If the market is up, your $200 buys fewer shares. But over time, because the market goes up and down, you end up with a lower average cost on the shares that you buy. And
Mm-hmm.
3, 4, 5 years later, the fact that you paid an average lower price means that your profit is higher.
Right.
So the idea of doing a disciplined amount, no matter what the market is doing, every month, like clockwork, or every week, or whatever whatever your pay period is, that's one reason that 401ks work so well for people. And other than buying a house, most people's greatest wealth item on their financial statement is their retirement plan. Once they get past 30s or 40s or whatever in age, if they've been able to participate in a 401k.
Mm.
So I'm a big fan of people doing that. And you would not believe how many people work normal middle class jobs for their whole life, and not particularly wealthy, but doing fine, just normal people, not the 1% or whatever, or in not in the dumps either,
Mm-hmm.
but just normal people making a modest living. and they'll end up with a house that's paid for, that's worth a lot of money because real estate's done well over the years. And then they'll end up with $1 million or $2 in their 401k. You would not believe how many millionaires are walking the streets that don't even think of themselves as millionaires because they've participated in a 401 through their employer. You would not. It's shocking. I mean, I came from a very, very poor background, so everything I've made is a shock to me. I'm happy about it, but I didn't come from it, and I didn't have it given to me. And I remember when I first got in this business and started looking at what people actually owned and what they were worth. I was like, holy cow! I had no idea people had this much money. You would be amazed at the sheer amount of money that normal people have. Not everybody, because like I said earlier, 40% of people couldn't even come up with $400 for a car repair.
Right.
But the people who have just done the right thing, just gone to work every day and done
just
the correct thing to live,
put it away.
You would be astounded at how much money some people have. I never fails to amaze me. Never fails to amaze me.
Yeah, it seems like it's one of those things where it's literally kind of like free money, to not do it. It just takes that same discipline and that consistency that we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Good, man. I think that is a phenomenal place for people to start. I think it kind of gives, and it touches on a lot of the things outside of going into like, what do you think about Google, and all that kind of stuff where it's just that speculation.
So let me ask you a question. Which of the four buckets is that when you have a conversation like the Google thing you just said? Which of the four buckets did you just touch on?
I would say speculation.
Bingo. Now, if you buy Google to hold for an indefinite period of time instead of trying to time it or whatever, that's growth investing.
Right.
But if you want to buy it because you think you can flip it in 6 months and make some money, that's speculation. Same stock, different principle. So there you go.
Makes sense. Okay, that makes a lot of sense too.
Yeah.
My last question then for you is, and answer as freely as you can.
Sure.
Just from opinion, speculation, whatever it may be. Obviously, an economic downturn is something that a lot of people are worried about. It's something that's been on the topic right now. It might be taking a back burner to COVID and everything else that's going on. Do you think that that's something that people still should be worried about, or should they be starting to get back to a sense of normalcy? Or is that something that really should be on the topic of people's minds, that like, listen, this is still a very volatile market?
Well, as far as the market goes, yes, it's a very volatile market, no question about it. And I think that volatility will continue into the future for a while. And volatility also represents opportunity, because remember, if you're putting money in on a regular basis, you want prices to go down now so you can buy more stuff on sale. Right. See, it's funny. Our business, the stock and bond business, the investment business, is the only business where when we throw a sale, nobody shows up because they're scared to death. If we mark the prices of everything sky high, they think it's the greatest thing in the world. It's kind of like you go down to the car dealer and you see this car that you really like, and it's $35,000 to buy a brand new one. And you look at it and you know that's what the MSRP on the car is, but you go down to sales and say, well, that'll be $70,000. Well, you're going to look at him like he's got four heads, because you know that it's not, that makes no sense. You'll walk out of there in a second. But with stocks, if we take a $35 stock and you see it run up to 70, the reason it ran up to 70 is because there's people lined up at the door to buy it. They keep putting their money in. So it's like, we have the only business where when we throw a sale, nobody shows up. And when we mark things up to ridiculous prices, they can't get enough of it. I've never seen anything like it before. It's weird. It's utterly weird. But as far as the economy goes, we have a lot of problems that we hope to work through. And I don't know how successful we'll be. I mean, we're getting by, but what we have just come through because of COVID is, for all practical purposes, not a recession. It's a depression, because in the 1930s, during the Great Depression that our grandparents went through, the highest unemployment rate ever recorded was 25%. We're probably at that or higher now. And it's all because of COVID. We have had the biggest and sharpest decline in economic conditions in the history of the country, including during wars, during the Great Depression of the 30s, during the Civil War. I mean, you fight a civil war, that's a very expensive proposition because you got both sides of a war happening in one country. It's
Right.
like everybody's paying, and that was a terrible time. And even that wasn't as big a dislocation economically as what we've just come through. This is a terrible time for us to have been. It's just been a terrible situation, and it's a long way from over. People in the restaurant and bar business were the first victims of this because those jobs went away immediately when they had to shut everything down. But now we're starting to see where that job loss thing is starting to work its way up the food chain into the management and the upper management and the professionals. And, in other words, it's definitely moving up the ladder. And that takes time.
Yeah.
And there are lots of effects of the COVID situation economically, economic effects that we are only now starting to come into having a clear view of, and not even that clear yet. One of the things that worries me is a lot of the government benefits that have been put in place to help with this. A lot of them run out at the end of July.
Mhm.
And if they don't reactivate those things, I look for more trouble for people. So I will say this, I would be reluctant to be a big spender along in here. Keep your cash, keep your cash close, because we don't know how the rest of this is going to play out. And it may not be all that wonderful. It won't be forever. Nothing's forever. But I think the uptick that we've seen here in the last month may be a little bit overly optimistic, I guess is the way I should put it. And I hope I'm wrong. I truly hope I'm wrong. I don't want anybody to suffer from this, but I don't think they sounded the all clear yet by any stretch. I mean, we got some time to go. These things don't work themselves out instantaneously like this.
Right.
So this is a good time to play it pretty close to the vest. Don't be a frivolous spender, and keep your health, keep your job. Do the best you can to kind of batten down the hatches, because this is a trying time for everyone. The only consolation you have is that we are all in this together, and
Yeah.
it's something that's affected the entire world. So it's not like you're being singled out. Don't feel that way. It's a tough
Amen.
time. Yeah.
Perfect. I
But yeah,
think
this
that's
is yeah, this has been really a lot of fun for me. If I can ever be of service in any way like this again, let me know. I love what I do. I'm passionate about it. I love the people that you're working with, because I used to be one and I miss it. I'm an old guy now, but I had more fun. That's one thing. A lot of ways I could describe myself, but the number one is I have had more fun than any person you ever met in your life. I guarantee. So, and a lot of it was back
I
in
can
those
attest
days.
for that.
Believe me, believe me. So anyway, I wish you and your clientele and everybody out there the best. And when you see this crazy old bald guy come in, you can stiffen up that Tito's and soda a little bit. It won't break my heart. I'm a pretty good
Amen.
tipper too. I remember how it was.
This is true. Yeah, this is all
Yeah,
good advertising for you.
yeah,
All right,
absolutely,
brother. Well, thank you
absolutely.
so much, Marvin. It was absolutely my pleasure, and I appreciate every little bit of knowledge that you just dropped on us there.
I would be happy to help anytime I can, and I look forward to seeing you soon.
Perfect. All right. Thank you so much, brother. Thanks for coming on.
You got it. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.
Adios.